Okay, good evening, everybody, once again. And I'm so excited to see us all here. And I'm sure we're going to have an amazing time. And we're going to learn a lot from the communication, how we communicate as designers. So, also, we have our very, very amazing speaker with us today, Diane, and she's already ready to take us on a lot of things today. Hi, Diane. Good evening once again. Hope you're doing great.
Hello, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much for honoring our invitation. We really, really appreciate, and we are so honored to have you here join us today. Thank you so much.
Of course, of course. I'm super excited to be here.
That's great. Okay, before I have Diane come up, before I have you come up, I want to read a brief bio about Diane before we have her speak today. So I want us all to pay attention because I'm sure we're going to get a lot from today, even from our story. We're going to get a lot from our presentation also. So Diane has been designing and building products for the past 15 years as a graphic designer, marketing designer, brand designer, product manager, and head of design. She has spent the last decade designing and crafting products while globetrotting across our amazing planet, 36 countries and counting. Wow. Her sweet spot is working with startups to lead the iteration of a more user-centered design by building design processes that combine traditional UI/UX best practices, business strategy, and facilitation. After a lot of soul-searching adventures and a twisty turning career path, she leaped from being a designer at Crocs to building a successful freelance career. Now she runs the Design Project, a $1 million plus revenue subscription-based design agency on a mission to make design accessible for startups. When she's not leading the team at the Design Project, you can find her looking for ways to live more minimally and DIYing a 1920s house. Wow, such an amazing, amazing speaker. Can we all do well to clap for our speaker? Let's clap. Let's do well to make some reactions. This is so, so amazing. She has done a lot of amazing things in the design field. And we are so honored to have her speak to us and learn from her this evening. So thank you once again, Diane, and we are ready to have you so you can begin your presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks so much for the intro. Hi, everyone. I am going to share my screen. I have a little presentation I've put together. Let's get it up here. 1 second. There we go. Oh, hold on. Thinking about it. Okay. There we go. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming today and wanting to learn a little bit more about communication, the importance of communication as a designer. So I want this talk to be as valuable for you as possible. So I do have this presentation, but I also would love for you to come up with some questions and some ideas and conversations to ask me at the end, because we'll definitely have quite a bit of time for you guys to ask any questions you have for me. So definitely be thinking of some great questions along the way. So I want to start with taking a little poll for you guys. And you can, in the chat, you could basically just say A or B. So I want to ask you, what is the most important thing to you as a designer? Is it A, being a Figma expert, or B, knowing the ROI of design? And what I mean by ROI is more of a business term. So knowing the return on investment of the designs that you're doing, knowing the business side of design. So in the chat, could you guys say A or B so I can get a little understanding of what you guys think is important? Let's see, we got a couple B's, we got an A.
Sorry, Diane. Please, you're not seeing your video. I don't know if you shared it, but you can't see
Oh,
your
I forgot to share my video. Yeah, let me turn it
video.
on.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Can you guys see me now? We're good?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, we got some B's, some A's. It seems pretty pretty split actually, which is great. Okay, so that's a great question, and there's not necessarily a wrong answer to this. And at different points in my career, I swayed one way or the other. When I first started out as a designer, I think that knowing the ins and outs of Figma and becoming a Figma expert was the number one thing I wanted to do. I wanted to get really great at my craft as a designer. But as I've grown in my career and kind of gone through lots of ups and downs, I realized that knowing the business side and knowing how to communicate the business side of design is one of the most important parts of design that's going to set you apart from all the other designers. And it took me a very long time to get to this decision. So here is a little illustration of the ups and downs I've had in my career. As you can see, there were many highs, there were many lows. And along this journey, I had many lessons that taught me the value of communication as a designer and in general as a person. So who am I and why am I talking to you today? So as kind of explained at the beginning, thanks so much for the intro, is I started my career as a graphic designer. I worked with Crocs, so those clogs that you guys probably all know with the holes in them. That's kind of where I started my career. And then from there, I moved to a freelance product designer and strategist. And so when I was here, I was also doing a lot of travel, which is really important in my story. So I'll talk a little bit more about that and why it was important and some of those lessons I learned until today. So today I am the founder of The Design Project. And we are a design agency that's really focused on building relationships with our teams, with our customers. And right now we have about 10 designers, which is really, really exciting. But let's take a step back and start at the beginning. So when I graduated college, I got a degree in graphic design, and I got my first job in corporate America, like we talked about, Crocs. And this was my dream job. I was like, oh my gosh, I got the perfect job. I'm set up for life. Everything's great. And at the beginning, it was great. I learned a lot. I got to work on some really cool projects, really high visibility, which was super exciting to me. And one of the coolest projects that I worked on at Crocs was designing a shoebox. You're like, okay, a shoebox, right? What's special about a shoebox? Well, the packaging team, an internal team, they came to me and they said they had a release for this new, funky, colorful shoe, and they needed a box that could really show it off, something that was really special. And so when I had my first internal meeting with the team, I pulled a bunch of inspiration of shoe boxes, and there was no excitement. None of the internal stakeholders had any connection. They were like, whatever, I'm not excited. This isn't what I want to do. And this was interesting to me. And I was like, okay, wait, let's pause. And I wanted to understand what they wanted. And so I started asking more questions to them about this special shoe. And what I learned is that it was from a famous fashion designer, and that this designer was really focused on pushing the boundaries and looking at the world with a different approach. And by asking these questions and getting more information from these internal stakeholders, I started to form a better picture. And by communicating and learning this, I rethought the shoebox from the ground up. So I pulled inspo from everywhere and anywhere that wasn't a shoebox. How could I take a step back and completely rethink it? And after many, many iterations, pitching to the internal team, me and the packaging team going back and forth, we came up with something really unique for this release. What was it? It was a shoebox purse. And it was a hit. Why? Why did we end up here? How did we end up here? Because the team and I communicated and worked together to get a better understanding of what we were after. So it's all about understanding those needs. And so I spent about 4 years at Crocs. And at the end of my time there, I felt unfulfilled. I was kind of daydreaming about what would make me happy. And this led to me deep diving into what I wanted as a career and what I wanted for myself personally. What I knew I wanted after some deep diving is I knew I wanted to work for myself. I wanted to get my own customers, and I really wanted to travel. So I thought, what if I quit my job, I go freelance, full-time freelance, and I start to travel? And this question comes up a lot of times throughout my career, is like, I ask myself, what's the worst that could happen? And when I thought about this, I narrowed it down to two things. One is not making enough money, which is very possible, and then having to come home. So if I couldn't make ends meet, I would have to come home. But I knew that if I didn't take the chance, I would regret not doing it. So 6 months later, I quit my job, I started freelancing, and I packed my bags and decided to travel the world for 12 months. So I hopped on a plane and I landed in Montevideo, Uruguay, South America. So when I started freelancing, I had to, one, figure out how to get work, and two, figure out how to make a living. Every day when I went to this co-working space you see in this picture, I did not apply to job postings of people looking for freelance designers. I wrote personal messages to companies that I thought were interesting, and I wanted to communicate with them how passionate I was about their product and their company in general. And this was a super valuable lesson, because when I wrote personal and direct emails to these people, I got way more responses than if I communicated in a formal email or applied to a job. So this was super insightful, and it led to some steady work, and I got to work on some pretty interesting customers. Freelance is all about communication. At the beginning of freelancing, I would hop on calls and pretty much jump into a call and wing it and present my design. And I would say something like, here is the design that I like the best. And what I expected was the clients and customers to agree, for them to be like, yes, this is perfect. Thank you so much, Dianne. This is exactly what I was looking for. That is not what happened. There was no understanding of where I came from, how I got to that design. Sometimes I would miss the mark completely, and the clients would be angry that I spent so much time designing something that was not at all what they wanted. So I came up with a process to get feedback early and often, and this is something I still do today. Every time I present a design, I reference all the previous decisions I made and why us as a team made them. This made sure that the client was a part of the full process and allowed us to collaborate and communicate to find the perfect solution. Here's an example. This was a client I worked with called Benny Blends, and I was basically helping them come up with a food product, and I was helping them completely brand it from the ground up. And in this example, what you'll see is at each stage, we narrowed it down and we made sure we referenced that stage. So for instance, we narrowed down to this mood board on the right. And then from there, we had a couple of logo options. And then we continued to narrow it down, continuing to work together on it until we got to the final logo. So I flipped through this quickly, but this is quite a bit of time, and it took a lot of iterations and a lot of steps. But without those steps and without communicating at each point what we were trying to get to and making sure we referenced every step of the way, we would not have landed on something we were so proud of. But after a few months of freelancing, this freelance life, it started to get hard. Freelancing is hard. For all of you out there that are looking to freelance, there's a lot of value in it, but it is unpredictable. It's kind of like a roller coaster. It's like you get to make your own customers and make your own schedule, get your own customers. But as soon as you get customers, then you have too much work to market yourself, and it's like this back and forth. So it's hard. And I ended that year after 12 months. I ended up back home and in debt because I wasn't able to continue traveling and freelancing, which was one of my fears, right? So when I got back home, I took a look at my life and what I wanted. And I was like, do I want a full-time job? Is that what I need to do? And I felt like that was what was the next step, but it didn't feel right. I didn't want to stop traveling. I didn't want to give up freelance. I didn't want to go back to corporate America. And it was tough. And I talked to a lot of friends and family, and honestly, most of them encouraged me to stay and to kind of build something more predictable. But I had this voice in my head that told me to keep going and to trust my gut. So what did I do? I booked a one-way ticket to Berlin, and I had this new idea of rethinking my freelance career and setting myself up for success. So there were two things I knew. I knew that I loved working with startups, and I knew that I loved working on UI UX design. And one of these UI UX projects that I was working on really humbled me and my design skills. I was building a product I was really passionate about. It was really complex, and I had come up with the perfect design process. I had done user flows, wireframes, user testing, except I didn't know what was going on in the business. And what was happening was that the company was running out of money, and what they needed was funding. But I was a designer. Why should I know? Why should I care, right? But by me not knowing what they needed and not helping them build a great process, basically, I wasn't able to build an MVP that was really important to them to show to investors and raise that money. So what did that mean? It left me without a job, and the company ran out of money. So this new realization, yes, I'm a designer, and yes, I love the design and Figma and the pixel pushing, but to be successful, I needed to understand business and communicate my knowledge of business and how design could improve the business side of a company. So I spent a lot of time studying more about business in general, and for it to make sense to me as a designer. I found some visual tools like this business model canvas. I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with this. This is a pretty famous model, and I highly encourage you guys to check it out. You can literally just Google business model canvas. And it was really helpful because I could use it with everyone. I could use it with founders. I could use it with interns. And it always facilitated conversation and communication at all levels. So it helped me learn a little bit more about the business so that I could make sure that anything I was designing was directly related and making a difference to the company as a whole. And by taking a more strategic approach, it unlocked a level of empathy with my clients that I'd never had before. And because of this business side of things and the UI UX that I was focusing on, I was starting to get a lot of steady work. So much, in fact, that I had too much work. What a problem to have. But it was hard to suffer through too much work, where I was spending 10 hours a day sitting at my desk in meetings, being the face of everything I was doing. And so I made the decision to hire a junior designer to help me. This was great because it no longer limited the capacity of what I could do to just me. I could take on more work, and I had a sense of freedom. And the biggest benefit of having a designer was I had someone to bounce ideas off of. And this led to the best work that I've ever produced. And this insight about collaborating with a designer, I was like, what else can I do? Who else can I collaborate with? So I wanted to collaborate with not just designers. I wanted to work with project managers, with stakeholders, anyone and everyone at a company, especially developers. So I was once working on a project with a developer, and I was designing these pretty simple layouts, clean, simple UI layouts. It had a really quick timeline, so we just had to move quickly. But when I handed off these designs to the developer, when they went live, they were nothing like the designs I came up with. For example, here was a super simple design I did, right? Nothing crazy, pretty simple, pretty clean, did the job. This is what it would end up looking like once it was live. I was frustrated. The developer was frustrated. So we ended up hopping on a call and having a heart-to-heart, and this taught me another really valuable lesson. I learned that he was using material design system. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it's basically a component library and a design system. So he was not building from scratch. He wasn't taking my designs and building everything from scratch. Because we had such a tight deadline, he was using this design system and trying to find components that were most similar to these custom designs that I had come up with. And it led to a mess. It led to what you just saw. Because a lot of the times he was just deciding on his own, tweaking things as he thought was necessary and continuing on. It was so much work for him. And as soon as I realized he was working with material design, I told him, I can design within material design. I can use those components and just tweak things like colors and fonts to make it feel more personal to the brand we were delivering and building for. And this would lead to a way better design and way less time for both of us. So by communicating and collaborating, we were able to find a solution. So now I always have developers join calls throughout the project because I want to understand what are their constraints and work with them instead of against them. So after me continuing to build this career and having all these new ideas of trying to help with communication and facilitation, I still hit a ceiling. I still had way too much work day in and day out, which led to burnout for me. So I started thinking, what if I were to start my own agency? How could I scale that? And I kept coming back to these ideas over months and months of period of time. I'd had conversations with friends and family, and I basically was trying to understand where I saw myself and what did I want out of my future. I decided I was ready to jump back in, start some kind of agency. And again, this question of what's the worst could happen came up. I did a workshop to define and communicate my how, what, and why. I strongly encourage you, any of you kind of trying to figure out where you see yourself going, what's really important to you, to do a workshop like this. You can Google what, how, why workshop, and you'll get a lot of results for this. And it was really impactful to help me understand and envision where I saw myself. And by doing this workshop, this is really where my company today, The Design Project, was born. What did I want? I wanted to build a UX UI design agency for startups. Why? I wanted to make design accessible. I wanted to bring great design to everyone, any company, any size. So slowly we started growing, one customer at a time. We were able to bring on some designers, one designer at a time. And I thought we were building a culture of passionate designers working on projects with customers they loved and who continue to grow from these experiences. But that's not what happened. As we grew, each designer was responsible for communicating with their own customers. And I assumed that everyone would be taking customer calls just like I did. But there was no set process. So how could the designers know what I had expected out of them? So, for example, one time we hired this really great designer, really great at UI, and really elevated our designs in general. But after about a month, I was receiving calls from our customers wanting to cancel their subscriptions with us. And so after I talked more with that designer, I learned another very valuable lesson. Just because I had a whole process that I thought was obvious of how to manage customers does not mean that everyone would do the same process that I did. So I spent some time putting together a step-by-step guide for the designers to work within customer calls, how they should follow it, how they should communicate with these customers. And I suggested them to rethink how they communicate in these customer calls. There were three main takeaways that I strongly suggested based on everything you've heard, all my highs and lows throughout the career. The first one is always send a message before the call with an agenda. This makes sure that everyone is always on the same page and knows what to expect. So the other thing, step number 2, is when you first hop on a call, don't jump in straight to design and deliverables. Have some conversation, ask some questions. How was your weekend? How's your day? And by building this friendly foundation, you're really creating a deep relationship. Because at the end of the day, we all want to have relationships with people. We don't want to just build something meaningless. And so I think it's really important to treat everyone, especially your customers, as people and get to know them a little better. And the third point is that at the end of every conversation with your customer, talk about next steps. So what's next? What are you guys doing? What's actionable? And then when that call ends, make sure you send a message to the customer detailing what was talked about, what are the next steps, and who is responsible for each of those steps. That's really going to set you up for success in customer calls. And this is going to bring me to today. So today, the design project, we are a team that is passionate about communication and collaboration internally with each other and also with our customers. And this is how we're able to continue to get great customers and build the best agency that we possibly can. And so I want all of you guys to remember this is a great quote by, of course, the famous Steve Jobs, is design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design is how it works. So don't be afraid to ask questions to make sure that you're always getting the best information you can so that you're building the best solutions for your users and your customer users. And number 2 is make sure you're always communicating from a place of building meaningful relationships, because building those meaningful relationships is one of the most important skills that you can have. Thank you guys very much for listening. This was great. And I really, like I said at the beginning, I would really love to make sure that I'm answering questions that you have for me. So I want to take this time. I would love for you to raise your hand and ask questions, or if you want to put questions into the chat so that I can answer them. I want to kind of continue to facilitate these conversations so that you guys are getting everything that you want out of this chat. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Dianne. What a very, very insightful presentation. Thank you very much. So I have a question, and if anybody that has a question also, you can do well to raise your hands, or you can also use the chat box. So I want to ask, during your in your journey, like in your experiences as a designer, have you experienced a situation where in terms of communication, the client is not getting where you're coming from, and the client is adamant on their own particular style, or what they believe the product should be, or what they believe the deliverable should be? And how do you deal with that? How do you communicate in a way that doesn't seem like you're going against them, but also like for the good of the product, also to bring a very good product out? So that's my question.
That is a great question. And definitely, I think all of us have probably gone through scenarios where we've worked with people that have really strong opinions about what they want and have strong opinions about how they think it should be, and maybe pushing back on some of your ideas. So one of the biggest recommendations I have, and one of the biggest tools we have in our toolbox, is user testing. It's a great part of UX, which means it's not just you and me going back and forth about what we like the most. It's actually taking a design and putting it out there and getting feedback from real users. So you can do this in many ways, and you can do it very simply as well, which is maybe you just put together your idea and then your customer's idea and say, let's just A/B test. Let's send this to a couple of users and see which one they prefer. It could be something as simple as that. And then it's really up to their users, the core users, to be able to make those decisions. So it's not on you pushing back on your client or customer. It's on them to say, hey, I really care what the users think, and this is the best way to get those users' feedback. So that's what I would suggest, is definitely recommend doing user testing, so it's not just you pushing back on a customer or customer pushing back on you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. That answered my question a lot. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So is there any other questions? Okay, before we get, so I have another question. So I don't know if, are there any particular communication techniques or tools that you recommend to designers that will help us improve collaboration and understanding in a team, like any particular communication tool that we can use? Yeah.
Yeah. So a tool that I have that I recommend using is there is a book called Lean UX. I'm actually going to write it in the chat. And it's a really great book to basically explain the process of design thinking, and also being able at every stage to get feedback and communication from users. So this book has been really important to me to help me understand and shape a process to help facilitate communication, open it up to people. So if you guys are interested in thinking more about how you can communicate better and iterate and build a better product as collaboration, I highly suggest reading Lean UX.
Okay, thank you very much. That sounds really helpful. All right, we have a couple of hands. Augustine Solomon, you can speak.
Okay, good evening, Diana. Thank you very much for the value you passed out. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. Rather, I didn't really get the section where you talked about design systems because I work in the startup, and when I say we don't have a design system, I know I'm the one that's meant to craft it out and all that. So for a small startup, it's okay to just continue with the normal style guide that we have been using. Then two, I also want to look for a way to communicate better with the developer and the owner of the startup, right? Because it's just me, a designer, and one developer, and then our boss. And so far, so good. The communication channel has been very, very poor. It's just like do your thing, and I'll do my thing. So I want that to change. I want to effect the communication. I want us to communicate better. I want him to understand what I'm doing effortlessly. So yeah, that's that question. How do I go about everything? I know you've recommended Lindy. I should check it out.
Okay, maybe Esther, you could help me. I missed a little bit of the second question you asked. I think it was a little hard to hear, but I think I can answer. I can start with your first question, which is design systems, right? Like, what if there's a design system? What if there's not a design system? How can you convince someone to use it? Was that kind of your first question?
Yes. The first one was like you talked about design system. So in a case where now we don't have a design system as a startup, but we have a style guide. Like so the style guide is not really organized. So I didn't really get the part where you were talking about the design system while working with the other designer. I didn't really get that part. So I wanted to make that part clearly. Then the second question was like, how do I communicate effectively with the developer? Because I'm working with a startup and it's just me, a designer, and the developer, just the two of us, then our boss. So the more like we don't have a project manager. So the communication is really poor because it's just like I'm a designer, just do your thing and give the designer. So I give the developer. But I want to change. I want us to like communicate better. So it can like if they work on me, I get more insight on what I'm doing. Then if they work for the developer as well.
Right. Okay. So working with design systems and working with developers is always very, very complicated, like always. But something that I would recommend is, I think I might have mentioned this, is like anytime you're starting a new feature, a new product, a new project, anything, is always to, and I hope this answers your question, so let me know if it doesn't, is to always loop in the developer very early. They should always be a part of every step of the process, because they can come in and you guys can have a conversation about, hey, should we use a design system? Should we use material design? Or should we build from scratch? How much time do we have to work on this project? And being able to build that style guide together, instead of like you working on a design system or you working from scratch and then handing it off. I think that by working together and just bringing it up very early, which I know is some companies don't run that way, which I understand. But I think if you're like, hey, I really see the value of bringing a developer on and having a conversation with that developer at the beginning, that is going to help you make sure that you're building within the constraints and building a design system that makes sense, or using a design system that makes sense, which is going to save you all a lot of time in the end. Augustine, does that answer your question? Is that kind of what you were asking?
Yes. I actually got the reply. Yeah. You actually answered right.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if you have any other questions, you can put them in the chat too. I'm happy to connect with you after, answer any additional questions you have.
All right, thank you very much. Adekunle, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Esther. Thank you, Diane. Really appreciate your input. So my question is, so as a designer now, you probably don't have much knowledge as of a developer like that. So how do you communicate from your own design? You expect something to be done, just as the example you cited, that you expect something after your design. So what happens if the designer, if the developer did something, or maybe due to some technicality or so how you, that as a designer now, you probably don't have much knowledge or much idea about coding and the rest. So how do you communicate? And the designer and the developer also doesn't have much knowledge about the design. How do you guys find a balance to just to make sure the project or the product looks as the designer wants it to be? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think the designer developer handoff is a really key part of the process. And what I suggest is when you get to designs that are like approved by the stakeholders, handing it off to the developer. Well, now Figma has a dev handoff tool, which is super cool, which I've started to play with. But you should make sure that all of your files are very clear to explain. Like a lot of the times when we have developer handoff, we have a notes section. So we're like, okay, on this screen, a user, you write like a user story. A user should be able to click this button and it should go to this page. And also using arrows within Figma to say, hey, if you click here, it goes to this page. So using notes, using arrows, and also building a prototype. Even if it's a rough prototype, it's going to help the developer understand what that interaction is that you are expecting. So those are the three things I would suggest. And also before you officially hand it off is hopping on a call with the developer and walking the developer through those designs. I also think the last thing I'll say about this is I think it's really important for the designer to do a QA. So once the developer has been building and working on this before they take it live, is you, the designer, should go in and be able to take a look at everything and give feedback on places that are not there, that you don't think are exactly how you designed it. And you guys work together to make sure that the dev ready, the final designs are perfect for them to push live. Does that answer your question? Was that some suggestions that could help you?
Yeah, that thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Diane. So Abidemi, you can ask your question.
Hi, Dan. Can you hear me? Okay. I mean, it was really a great time for me as I learned a lot. Thank you so much for such an insightful session. So my question is quite different because I actually got started. I mean, a few months ago, like as a designer, I just got into design. So, I mean, I love the way you, shared your story. It was really interesting and exciting for me. So I just want to know, like, okay, in a situation, okay, for example, now I'm in Nigeria, and things are really different. The way
Oh, wait, I can't hear you. I lost you.
Hi, Abidemi. Yeah, can you? Guess probably a network. Abidemi. Okay, while she's trying to connect back.
Oh,
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I said my question is like for someone like me, okay, like as an entry level into the design industry. So like what would you recommend? Because like I said, the picture you painted to me, it was really an interesting one, and I on the other end have been seeing something different, like a lot of challenges here and there. So what are the possible challenges would you state, or would you make us understand as we that are just entering the design field that would face, and how do we overcome this? So that's my first question. Then second question is, I mean, in a competitive job market, as the world is presently, like we have millions of product designers out there. So how do you stand out as an entry level? How do you stand out? How do you get selected? I've applied for a number of internship positions out there, and each time I keep getting a rejection mail. So how do I handle this? What do I need to do better? Yeah, basically. So those are my two questions. Thank you so much. Hope you
Yeah,
understand.
thanks for your question. So, the biggest recommendation I have for junior designers getting into the market, it actually goes back to communication and collaboration as well, is making sure that you have a really good portfolio. And when I don't mean in a typical sense, what I mean by a good portfolio is that you have even just one project that you feel shows the full process, the full design process, and that you hit every step of the process, and that you can communicate the value of design and communicate your decisions well in an interview and just on your portfolio in general. So what that means is there's a lot of examples of portfolios out there, but I think it's like let's say, so for me, when I hire designers, I'm spending probably, to be honest, like 5 seconds on a portfolio. And there are a few things I really want to see. I want to see the results. I want to see like the business results. What did your design, what did your project deliver? Was it saving designers time? Was it saving their customer time? Was it getting acquisition? Even if it was a personal project, what did you do with it? What was the result of that project? So that's really important, to show some kind of result. And then to give like a quick overview, even showing designs of like a before and after, or if it's from scratch, just showing why this project was important to you and how design played a role in communicating that value. So it goes back to communication. It goes back to how you can defend your designs, how you can explain why you did what you did and have results to back up those decisions. So that's probably the biggest thing I would say. And actually the second part is make sure that you also are yourself. So make sure that your personality shines through, whether it's in an interview or even in your portfolio, something that's really you're passionate about, that makes you stand out as a person. Because as I talked a lot about is relationships, is these people, when you're applying to an internship, they also want to build a relationship with you. They want you to be someone that also has those values that are aligned with theirs. So you also need to make yourself stand out as a person versus just another designer that's doing the same thing as every other designer. I hope that was valuable. Those are some tips that I usually try to give junior designers. So thank you for your question and good luck out there.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, that was very helpful. I also gained some things from that. So yeah, Franklin, you can ask your question.
Okay. Working as a new designer who is new into the tech industry, I believe developer will always find it difficult to understand you and always feel like you are making work or things difficult for him. So I don't know, how do we communicate with developer when you are new into the tech industry, because they always feel like they are not getting what you are explaining due to you working with them as a new designer into the tech industry. So how do we communicate with them in that way?
Yes, that's a good question. So the number one thing I would recommend is that you learn some small dev skills. So learn about CSS, learn about how development works, because that's going to help educate you on how a developer thinks in terms of your designs. So if you can maybe take a class on development, or even just read a quick book on development, I don't know, use ChatGPT to tell you a little bit about development, whatever makes sense to you. But by gaining those skill sets and learning how developers think and how they work, that's going to make sure and set you up for success to work better with developers. And that's something I didn't do at the beginning of my careers. I didn't learn a lot about development. To be honest, I still don't know as much as I should. But the designers on my team that understand development can build a way better relationship with developers because they really understand how development works. So my advice would be to learn a little bit about development.
Good. That's good. I'll do more research on how to work with developers and all that. Thanks. I appreciate.
Of course.
Yeah, same here. I'm also scared of coding, but I'll definitely try that too. All right, Olorunfemi Damilare, you can ask your question.
Oh, thank you very much, Diana, for your presentation. I'm really, really grateful for this. A quick one I want to ask, mostly concerning on brand, or on brand designer and also a product designer. So on the brand aspect, I want to ask, sometimes communication, sometimes due to the use of elements in design, how do we prophesy the design, the brand aspect to stakeholders that they can easily understand without even less communication with the stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when doing branding, there's a lot of strategy that goes into branding, and a lot of people don't think about strategy and branding. They're like, oh, it's a cool logo or colors. But for you to be able to build a great brand, you obviously need to understand and know the whole strategy behind the company. So something that I do a lot if I'm working on a branding project, I haven't done that as much now because I do more product design, but there's brand. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the design sprint from Google Ventures, but they also have a small workshop called the branding sprint, and I can write that down. Sprint by Google Ventures, and it's really powerful because it asks questions to your customers, to whoever wants the brand, like, what is your mission, vision, values? Like, it has a slider, like, how would you categorize your company? Are you more for everyone? Are you more elite? And so it asks all these questions for you, the designer, to get a better idea of like the values of the company, and so that you can make sure that whatever you're coming up with, whatever branding you're thinking about, it's going back to these values and what's important to the company. So you really are coming from a strategy standpoint. So by kind of working together with your customer and answering some of these deep strategy questions, I think that's a really great way to kind of add and work together and communicate better with that customer, and be able to build a better brand. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, a bit. Yeah, it's actually answered the question. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right, so Emmanuel Oderinde, you can ask your question.
Okay, hi Dan. So you said, okay, I'm a product designer and I currently work in a logistic firm. Now the issue I have is, first of all, I'm not too good at communicating or communication in general, but I just don't seem to understand the business, and it affects my design. Now, not that I haven't done my research, but it's logistics. Like, one moment you think you know it, and the next thing they're coming up with new trends, and it's hard to keep up and add your own innovative ideas to. So, like, how do you navigate that? Because I know you mentioned something similar. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't know if the company you're working at has like objectives for the quarter or like things they're looking to do. So a lot of companies have like, they call them OKRs, and they're like, I'm trying to get to XX revenue, or I'm trying to get this many customers this quarter. And by you understanding those high level company goals for that period of time, that's going to make sure that what you're designing, you can communicate the value of your design. You can say, hey, I'm a product designer and I'm working on for an example, I'm working on the onboarding process so that we can get more users to convert, right? Just by knowing the goal of the company and using that to define how your designs are affecting it, that's going to be really great at communicating to your stakeholders, to your team, the value of design and the value of you designing for the business. So I don't know if there's specific examples of work that you're doing now that you can tie back to some part of the company, whether it's you coming up with those priorities or maybe your team is coming up with those priorities. But however you can do that, if you always know what the business goals are, I think that's a great way to like make sure that you're always designing with that business sense in mind. Was that helpful?
Very helpful, Dan. Thanks.
Perfect.
Thank you, Dianne. The last hand raised. If any other person has a question, you can still raise your hand. Cheryl, you can ask a question.
All right, thank you so much, Esther. I do have a question, but I'm not really sure if the question might actually align with the topic. But this is the question: how can designs, let's say product designs, UI UX, for example, or brand design, how can it help for companies to make sales, especially startup brands? A very good example of to my question is if I have a client that is about to bring in a service or render a service, something related to bring closer to Amazon. Let's say it's offering the same service like Amazon, meaning it has an e-commerce website, have a listing and stuff like that. And knowing very well that its big competitor in the market is Amazon. How can I use my designs, my skills to make the client be able to make sales and have customers, have clients to patronize? How can I use my designs to be able to stand in the market and make brand have sales, be patronized? How can I make that happen? That's my question.
So it's more like, how can your designs help with the sales of the startup? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so that's a good question. I think it kind of goes back to kind of like the previous question we were just talking about, is like the business, the value, understanding the company goals. And so if the company goals like sales, they need more sales. I think it's understanding how the company works and how they get sales. So if you're building like a landing page, for instance, that's going to get more sales, you have to understand, what is that flow look like? What is that end goal? Is it like how are they going to get sales? Is it someone signing up for a call? Is it someone actually converting online and like signing up and paying a subscription fee? What do they need to do for it to be considered a sale, first of all? And then you have to make sure that everything you're doing, everything in the landing page is pointing to making it as easy as possible for the user to get that. So a lot of the times users are like, oh, I don't know if I can commit to this. I don't know. So something you can be thinking about strategically is maybe you offer a 7-day free trial. Once people sign up, obviously that commitment is really hard for people, but if they think they have a 7-day free trial, they're way more likely to do it. So I think it's thinking about it from a UX standpoint and like, how do you need to convert that person? What does that look like? And what are some great UX practices that can convert them? Like I just said, for instance, a 7-day free trial, or hopping on a call to learn a little bit more, or making it more personalized. I don't know. There's many directions you could go. And I think by understanding that main goal of converting, you can come up with some ideas to test to get those converted people into that sales funnel. Did that answer? Was that helpful?
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Thank you very much. So, Sophia, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. So my question goes is, let's say you're a designer on a project, and you're using a user story to do your design. All you do was to do only the interface. But when you want to give your design to the stakeholders to check, want to check the design, based on the fact that you're not the one bringing out the user story, you have someone like the product manager that did the user story, and it is you that your stakeholder have a question that is supposed to refer to your product manager. How do you communicate that aspect to the stakeholders based on the user story they're asking?
So you were kind of breaking up a little bit. I know you're talking about the user story and stakeholders and communicating, but I didn't get the exact question in there. Maybe you could ask one more time.
Okay, what I said is like you're doing a project and you what you, what you only supposed to do the design. You're the UI designer, but then
Sophia, you're still kind of breaking. Let me see. I think I got her a little. I would say what you said, and if I'm right, you can tell me. So, you are a product designer, and you also work with with product managers, and I think the product managers did your user story for the product, while the designer is just designed the product. So stakeholders are asking about the user story. So how do you communicate to the stakeholders? Because it's not the designers that did user story in that situation. So Sophia,
Oh,
is that what you're asking?
that's the question.
All right.
perfect. Okay, that's a great problem. That's a great question to ask, and that's a problem that a lot of people have. So this is my recommendation. Again, all companies function a little differently. So I'm just thinking of what I would try to do is that the fact that the project manager is building this user story and the designer doesn't know it is a problem in my mind. Like the designer and the project manager should be working closer together to make sure that they're building a user story that makes sense to you as well. And I know that's much easier said than done. I completely understand that. But my suggestion to you would be to schedule a call and have a conversation with the project manager to make sure you do understand what you're doing, what you're trying to build, so that you can better communicate it. And that means that you have all of the knowledge that you need to communicate with everyone and to build something that makes sense for the users. So I don't think that was the best answer, but that's what I would recommend is really reaching out to that project manager to understand it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. To build up on that, so I had the situation back when I was working. I was running an internship program with some product managers. So based on my understanding, I just got into the design field like 6 months now. So based on my understanding of who product managers are, I feel they are like the connecting branch between designers, stakeholders, developers, and what have you. So they are supposed to be very communicative with us, per se. So, but we had this issue with them where they were not communicating with us, both with the designers and also the developers, and it was really a big issue. So we brought it to their attention, but I don't know why they felt attacked. So they felt attacked that we were coming like, "Oh, are you saying we are not doing it? We didn't do anything on this project at all?" So in that situation, should is I felt like, okay, maybe we shouldn't have brought it up, but then it's not going to work for us. It's not going to work for them as well. So there a better way we should have brought it up? Well, personally, I felt like we did not. We actually did it in a good way. To them, it felt we were attacking them. So I don't know where's the balance in that. That's design.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And that happens like that's definitely a recurring theme for a lot of designers. So I think a way to go into a conversation and for that person to not feel attacked and you're like, oh, I didn't get this information that I thought I needed from you. A suggestion I have is doing a retro. So a retrospective call. So a retrospective call is when you finish a project and then everyone hops on a call and you basically have this workshop where everyone spends 5 minutes coming up with things that went well, then 5 minutes, things that didn't go well, and things that you want to work on. and then everyone gets the space to share what they thought in those categories of what went well, what didn't go well, what they could do better. And then you guys will slowly start to find patterns of like, oh, you guys, you the project manager also felt like this didn't go well. What can we do better next project to solve this issue? And so that gives everyone the space to rethink it, and then they don't feel as attacked. It's like, let's just remove your egos, remove everything, and just have a real conversation so that we can improve for everyone going forward. So that would be my best recommendation, is to try to do some of these retrospective meetings after projects, especially projects that could have gone smoother.
Okay, yeah, thinking back, that would have actually worked and it would have been better. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, the last question for today. Sorry, our time is fast spent. Solomon, you can ask your question.
Okay. This is my question. What do you do in a case whereby you're a designer working at your first job in a startup that doesn't have a project manager? Yeah. At my startup, we don't have a project manager, and well, actually, because of that, I don't have experience working from previous jobs, so I don't know how the project manager. How do you step in as a designer? What do you do? That is one. Then two, what do you do when you as a product designer or UI designer, you get information about changes secondhand? I mean, the boss updates the developer, and the developer updates you. So we don't get that first-hand information directly, like if we need to make these changes and there's a meeting where there's a developer. It's more like them seeing the developer as the main person doing everything. Meanwhile, the ideation and everything is almost coming from you. So what do you do in a case like this?
It's kind of hard to hear you. It's a little muffled. I don't know, Esther, if you heard some of that.
Yeah, I heard the second one, but not the first one. So I think the second one was in a situation whereby it seems like it's the developers that they are only focusing on. So what do you, developers don't really update the designers regularly. So what do you do in that situation where it's like the designer does not exist or something like that? So I don't know about your first question. I was also not.
Okay. Yeah, if you can hear me clearly, just let me know.
Okay, it's a little better.
Okay. The first question goes like this. What do you do in a case where you're working at your first job as a product designer or UI designer, and it's a startup, but there is no project manager? So it's just you, developer, and the boss, the owner of the product. What do you do in this case? Is that clear? What do you do in a case whereby there is no product manager that coordinates designer and developer? It's just people are just left on your own. That's the question. That's the first question. Then the second question is that what do you do when you as a designer, you get information from the boss for changes second hand? That means you get the information, he updates developer, then developer updates designer. Meanwhile, it should not be like that. It's meant to be like, okay, a general meeting where the boss updates both developer and designer on changes or things that needs to be done. What do you do in this case? I don't know if this is clear enough.
Okay, it's clear. Diane, I don't know if you're clear about it.
I didn't fully understand it. Sorry.
Okay, the first one, you said, what do you do as a designer working in your friend's job? There's a designer, there's a developer, and there's the product owner, but there's no product manager or project manager. So how do you manage that kind of scenario? And also the second one, in a situation where a designer is only getting second-hand feedback. So the boss communicates with developers and developer communicates with the designer, rather than all three of them maybe communicating together, going on a call and talking about it. So how do you do that?
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. I got it, Solomon. Okay. So for the first question, not having a project manager, how can you work with a whole team? So I think something that's really important is coming up with a process. What is a process that you guys can come up with that is going to make sure everyone understands what they're responsible for? So it goes back to communication. You come up with this project of like the designer's going to do this job, work on the designs, present a design, get feedback from everyone. Maybe it's the developer knows when is able to give that feedback at the time that they need the feedback. So you're asking for their feedback at the specific time, and you kind of work through a typical product design process, but make sure everyone knows what they're responsible for and when their due dates are, so that you guys can work together without having a project manager that kind of oversees that. So it's really you guys building a process and holding yourselves accountable to those due dates and who's responsible for what. So that's my biggest suggestion, which again, I know is easier said than done, but I think spending that time to come up with it is going to be really powerful. And then developers that update their designs and then the designer is kind of out of the loop. I think this also can be solved with process is making sure there's a design QA stage into that process. So before your team takes anything live, they have to put it in front of the designer's eye, and the designer has to approve it or give feedback until the designer checks it off and approves that the design that is going live meets the requirements that the designer set out. So I think it's about that accountability and making sure that that's built into the process, so you, the designer, never feel like there are things that are happening that you should have a say on that you don't have a say on. I hope that, did that answer your question? Does this make sense?
Yes, yes, yes.
Perfect.
All right. Wow. Thank you very much, Dianne, for this very insightful presentation and for sharing everything you shared with us today. We really, 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 truly appreciate you. And we are honored that you were able to honor our invitation. And we also see the work you're doing in the design space, and we appreciate you. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you guys for coming also. Thank you for joining. And as many of you that were again, one or two things, we appreciate you for joining us, and we hope to see you in subsequent sessions once again. So thank Pexels also for connecting, for making this possible. Pexels, the UI UX, is a design school that teaches students UI UX, and you can check out the class plan on pexels.com. So you can always check that out and see what classes you can take. We're always ready to take wherever level you are, entry level, novice, beginner, advanced level. There's always something for you in Pexels. Thank you very much. So this session holds every two times in a month. So every 2 weeks, every fortnight, we have the session. So we appreciate you for coming in. And yeah, I was about to ask that. So Dianne has dropped her LinkedIn account, so you can do what's connect with her. Check out her startup also, the design project. Check her out. And you can also do what's connect with her. And we appreciate you once again, Dianne, for joining us. And I don't know if you have any last thing to say before we call it a night. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to thank you all so much for coming, listening to me, asking such great questions. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to continue to answer any and all questions you have. I love helping designers kind of continue to grow. So thank you, everyone. Keep up the great work. Good luck out there. And
thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, guys. Good night, everybody. Have a lovely rest of the day. Bye, Dianne. Bye, everyone.